You're just a burden. Do you know that? That's what my son said to me, right in the living room of the house I spent 25 years of my life paying for. He didn't shout, he wasn't angry, he didn't even tremble. He said it the way someone states a simple, obvious fact, cold and blunt, like the wooden floor beneath my feet that day. And what hurt the most wasn't even the words. It was the way he turned his back on me right after, as if I were just a shadow standing in his way. I stood frozen. The familiar kitchen suddenly felt foreign. The walnut dining table where I used to place stacks of pancakes for him when he was little now felt cold and heavy. My son, the baby I once held in my arms, the boy I shielded from rain and storms, the child I stayed up all night watching just to make sure he was still breathing, now looked at me like I was an old, useless piece of furniture. I am 65. Not young, not strong, but I never imagined I would hear those words from my own child. After my husband passed, I leaned on my son more than ever. I thought, no matter how cruel life became, I still had him, a bit of warmth left in my family. But everything changed after he got married, not right away, not in a single day. It happened slowly, like a tiny crack in a wall you only notice when the whole thing is about to collapse. Every morning, I woke up early, as always, preparing breakfast for the household. I made his coffee exactly the way he liked it, strong, no sugar, a bit of cinnamon, but my daughter-in-law came downstairs, frowned, and said, "Ugh, this coffee smell is too strong, I can't stand it." I smiled, apologized, and poured it out without a word. I was used to it, that's what mothers do. We avoid causing trouble. But when I looked at my son, he didn't defend me, not even a little. He just stood there watching me pour out the coffee I had made for him. At noon, I sat alone in my room and heard their whispers in the hallway. "I told you already. This house is too small. Having an old person here is such a hassle. I know, but give me some time." "No. Hurry up. I don't want to live like this forever." I quietly closed the door. I didn't want them to know, I heard. Day after day, I felt myself shrinking inside the very home that once felt so warm. The first signs of being pushed away. My daughter-in-law rearranged everything in the kitchen and told me, "Don't touch anything. You'll mess it up." Family meals slowly stopped including me. My son no longer asked, "Mom, did you sleep well?" When he came home, his first glance was no longer toward me. I began to feel unnecessary, a stranger in my own house. At night I sat alone on the old sofa, pretending to watch TV. Their laughter drifted from their room, while the living room felt wide, empty, and cold beside me. I finally understood. Loneliness isn't living alone. The real loneliness is living with the people you love while they act like you don't exist. Then it happened. One rainy afternoon I was folding laundry when I heard my daughter-in-law say, "Honestly, your mom can't do anything around here. She's just annoying." It felt like someone hit my ear with a hammer. My hands shook so badly that the shirt slipped to the floor. Then my son replied in the calmest, most terrifying voice I had ever heard from him. "Yeah, Mom is just a burden now." I froze. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't blame anyone. I just went silent. I wondered, what did I do wrong? Did I love too much? Did I sacrifice so much that they began to think it was my duty, not my affection? I couldn't find an answer. Only one thing was clear. My heart had cracked. That night I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen. The kitchen that once smelled like my homemade pastries now felt empty and cold. On the table was a list of unnecessary items. My old piano, the one my husband and I bought when we were young, was on the list. My daughter-in-law had marked it in red. "Move to garage." My throat tightened. I sat down, my hand on the cold table. I felt myself disappearing. I knew I was being slowly pushed out of this family's life. I stared out the window as the rain fell, each drop sliding down like my own tears. And I wondered, would my old age end in quiet abandonment, like the items they no longer wanted in the house? Where are you listening from? Comment your city or country so I know how far the Voices of Auntie Tay family has reached around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tay for the next part of the story. The conflict slowly peeled itself open, layer by layer, like someone exposing a truth I had been too afraid to face. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest. Not from age, but from the words echoing in my mind. I heard my daughter-in-law walking in the hallway. She opened the door so hard it rattled the wall. I tried to get up, but I felt dizzy. Probably from not sleeping. When I stepped out of my room, she was sorting papers on the dining table. Some were familiar bills, but some I had never seen before. "What are you doing?" I asked softly. She didn't look at me, didn't answer. She just gathered a stack of papers and said, "I'm reorganizing the house documents." I froze. The house? Documents? Her tone on the word house made it sound like I had nothing to do with it. I stood silently for a few seconds, then went to the kitchen to get warm water. My hands were so cold the glass almost slipped. But things didn't stop there. At noon, when I went to cook soup, everything in the kitchen had been moved. Pans, pots, spices, all in different places. I opened cabinet after cabinet. Nothing was where it used to be. I asked, "Why did you move everything?" She replied quickly, "To make it neat. Don't use the kitchen anymore, it'll handle it. You always spill things." I knew that wasn't the real reason, but I chose silence. I stared at my own kitchen, the kitchen where I used to cook every meal for my son, where I made him soup during fevers, now a place where my hands no longer belonged. The conflict grew with every small action. That afternoon, while I was washing towels, I heard my son in the living room. "You're right, we have to hurry." Then my daughter-in-law's irritated voice, "Stop hesitating. Having your mom here is such a problem." I leaned against the wall. They didn't know I was there. My son, was he agreeing to get rid of me? I walked into the living room as if I had heard nothing. He looked at me and asked, "Mom, are you going to the store? It'll give you money." I looked at the money in his hand. For the first time in my life, he handed me money like I was asking for help. I didn't take it. He shrugged and walked away. And I stood there, feeling the last piece of my dignity crumble. That night, the truth became clearer than ever. I was walking past their room when I heard a tense conversation inside. My daughter-in-law said, "I want to change the name on the house. I already called to ask. We just need your mom to sign one paper." "That's it," my son replied. "But Mom will be suspicious." My daughter-in-law, "Just tell her it's for insurance. She's old. She won't understand anyway." I felt my legs go weak. My heart was pounding so hard I had to lean on the wall just to stay standing. They wanted to take my house, the house my husband and I built with sweat and sacrifice. Every brick, every wall, had become the target of their greed. I stepped back to my room, closed the door, and buried my sobs into my old pillow. But the biggest shock came the next day. When I opened my wardrobe to get a towel, I noticed some of my things were gone. The scarf my husband gave me on my birthday, the coat I saved for going to church, even the cheap jewelry box that was a keepsake from my mother. I walked into the garage. On an old table, my belongings were piled up carelessly, like junk someone was planning to donate or throw away. My hands trembled as I touched each item. Many things were dented, some stained with oil and dirt. I felt myself being removed from this family's life piece by piece, one item at a time, one corner at a time, all the little places where I had once put my love. The conflict reached its peak when they brought me the paper. That evening, my son came to me and put a stack of documents on the table. "Mom, sign this. It's just house insurance paperwork. Nothing important, nothing important." Those 3 light words felt like a stone dropping onto my chest. I glanced at the small print in the corner. Temporary transfer of ownership. My heart turned cold. I looked up at my son, the child I had raised with a lifetime of love. He avoided my eyes. I didn't sign. I didn't say a word. I simply pushed the paper back toward him. His hands clenched. He walked away without speaking. The sound of his bedroom door slamming felt like the sound of my whole life closing. In that moment, I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a battlefield. On one side was me, a quiet, aging mother. On the other side were the very people I once believed would protect me when I became weak. The pain of betrayal can be heavier than death. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, and asked myself, what will they do next? I didn't know, but I could feel it. The real storm was only just beginning. Where in the world are you listening from? Comment your city or country so I can see how far the Voices of Auntie Tay family has reached. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tay to watch part 3, where everything truly begins to shatter. Despair. When I realized I no longer had a place in my own family. I used to think that if I stayed silent long enough, gentle enough, patient enough, everything would be okay. That if I kept loving, enduring, and sacrificing, my son would eventually remember a mother's love. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. Because my silence made them think I was weak. Made them think I didn't notice. Made them think I no longer had the strength to protect my own life. That morning of despair began with the sound of something breaking. I was washing dishes when I heard a loud crash, glass shattering on the kitchen floor. I rushed out and saw my daughter-in-law standing next to my husband's framed photo, the one that had hung in the living room for over 20 years. The frame was on the floor, the glass shattered, the photo torn with a long rip across it. My voice shook. "What are you doing?" She glanced at me, cold and emotionless. "This is old. I'm going to replace it with our wedding photo. The house needs a new look." I bent down to pick up the picture. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it. The tear went right across my husband's eyes. I couldn't tell what hurt more, the ruined photo, or the fact that my son was standing there watching and said nothing. He just muttered, "Let it go, Mom. He's gone." "What's the point of keeping it?" I froze. "Has gone. What's the point of keeping it?" That's what he said about the man who raised him, taught him, loved him more than himself. In that moment, it felt like someone squeezed my heart tight. I had never felt so small. But the hurt didn't stop there. At noon, I went to open the fridge to take some fruit, but the door wouldn't open. There was a lock attached to the handle. I thought I was seeing things. But no, the fridge was really locked. I turned to my daughter-in-law and asked, "Why did you lock the fridge?" She answered casually, "To save food. You eat too much. The food is for the two of us." I stood there stunned. A mother, having to ask for permission to open the fridge in her own kitchen. I didn't want to start a fight, so I just said softly, "I only wanted some fruit." She shook her head. "I'll check everything when I get back and then open it. For now, don't touch it." I turned away. It felt like even the most basic right, the right to live as part of a family, had been taken from me. That afternoon, I was pushed out of my own bedroom. When I came back to rest, I saw my bed had been moved. My wardrobe doors were wide open. Some bags of my clothes were placed by the door. My son looked at me and said shortly, "Mom, move to the small room next door. We need this room." I stood there like a statue. My room was the only place in the house that still held the memories of me and my husband, where I kept photos, old letters, the little things that had kept me company for decades. And yet, he spoke as if he were moving a piece of furniture. I forced a weak smile and said, "I can move to the small room, but could you at least tell me in advance?" My son frowned. "Mom, you're too difficult. It's just a small thing." I didn't answer. Because if I opened my mouth, I knew I would burst into tears in front of him. I picked up a few of my clothes and walked into the smaller room, just big enough for a single bed and a tiny wardrobe. No window, no light. I put my things down and, for the first time in many years, I sat on the edge of the bed and cried like a child. That night, my despair reached its peak. My son and daughter-in-law started arguing again in the living room. I heard, "When is your mom going to sign the papers? She has to sign so we can get the house in our name." My son replied, "I'm trying, but she's being stubborn." I clutched my chest. Stubborn. My child called me stubborn because I refused to sign away my house to him and his wife. I took out my phone. I thought about calling someone, but I didn't know who to call. My husband was gone. Most of my old friends lived far away or had settled into their own lives. I didn't want to bother my daughter in another state. She had her own family and problems. I sat there, alone in the dark room, listening to the ticking of the clock. I felt like I was being swallowed by my own life. I wondered, was I really a burden? Was my old age truly worthless now? Tears fell, and I didn't even bother wiping them away. Everything felt heavier, darker, harder to breathe. That was the first night in my life that I was afraid of my own home. But in the deepest moment of despair, my eyes fell on my husband's old safe, the one I hadn't opened in years. I stood up, took the key, and opened it. Inside was something I had forgotten about long ago. something that would change everything, something my son and daughter-in-law knew nothing about. I placed my hand on the stack of documents inside, and for the first time in many days, my heart trembled not from pain, but from a thin, fragile ray of hope appearing in the dark. Where are you listening from? Comment your city or country so I know how many hearts this story is reaching around the world. Hit subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tay to follow part 4, where the first light of hope appears in the darkness. A ray of hope in the dark, when a mother who thought she was powerless finds a strength she had forgotten. I stood in front of that old safe for a long time. My hands trembled as I turned the dial, listening to each small click echo in the dark room. I hadn't opened it since my husband died. I thought I would never need to touch what was inside. Too many memories, too much pain, too many things that squeezed my heart. But that night, I couldn't avoid it anymore. The safe opened with a dull sound. The smell of old paper and cold metal drifted out, carrying with it a part of my life I had locked away because I was afraid to hurt again. I took out the top stack of papers. The weak yellow light in the room fell on the words I had nearly forgotten. The house title. And in the line that said owner. My name. Only my name. Not me and my husband. Not me and my son. Not the family. Just me. And only me. I gripped the papers tightly. My heart pounded wildly, filled with a storm of feelings, shock, emotion, memories, and then a small flame of hope. I remembered now. My husband had done this a few months before he died. He had told me, "I want you to have a home that no one can take from you. No one." I had asked him, "But what about our son?" He gave a sad little smile and said, "Life is unpredictable. I just want to be sure you won't be hurt again." Back then, I didn't understand what he meant. Now I did. Under the title was an old bank document I had long forgotten. A faded green savings book, the print almost worn off. I opened it. Inside was my husband's handwriting. "For you. If one day you need to stand up for yourself, don't be afraid." The amount wasn't huge, but it was enough for me to live on my own. Enough so I wouldn't have to bow my head. Enough so I wouldn't have to beg anyone to let me stay. I covered my mouth with my hand as tears fell onto the old pages. I wasn't crying from sadness this time. In that moment, it felt as if my husband had returned, placed his hand on my shoulder, and whispered, "You are not alone." But the biggest surprise was in the last stack of papers. It was a legal document my husband had prepared years ago, a type of trust he created to protect our family assets. It clearly stated, my property could not be transferred unless I personally agreed and signed. Anyone who tried to force or deceive me into signing could be prosecuted. I sat up straight. For the first time in months of living in darkness, my chest didn't feel so heavy. It was like someone had lit a candle in a suffocating dark room. I knew then. My despair wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of another path, a path I had to walk not to get revenge, but to protect myself. The next morning, I called my husband's old lawyer. His voice was deep but warm. "You really kept all those documents? Good. Very good. Now I need to see you as soon as possible." For the first time in a long while, I dressed neatly, tied my hair back, and walked out of the house without saying a word to anyone. I sat in the lawyer's office for almost 4 hours. He went through every document, line by line, taking notes. Finally, he looked at me and said, "You don't have to be afraid of anything. All the assets belong to you. No one has the right to force you to sign. If they try, you can call the police." I tightened my hands on the table. I wasn't used to feeling protected. But that day, I didn't feel abandoned anymore. I asked, "What should I do?" He said, "Stay calm, collect evidence, and wait for the right moment." And so I started doing something I never imagined I would, collecting evidence. I put a small recorder in my pocket. I kept my phone recording when they talked. I saved the bills they changed into their names without asking me. I wrote down every action in an old notebook. Every time they talked about selling the house, I stayed quiet. Every time they pushed me to sign something, I smiled gently. Every time they insulted me, I just stepped back. But inside, I was no longer the weak mother they thought I was. I was no longer the woman who only knew how to swallow her tears. I had started to stand up quietly, but firmly. The second ray of hope came on a Sunday afternoon. My son thought I didn't know how to use a computer, but I quietly logged into my email, the one I hadn't opened in a long time. I found the latest utility bill. The name on the account had been changed to my son's name, but I knew. To do that, they had to submit a form with my signature on it. I hadn't signed anything, so whose signature was it? I opened the attached file. The signature at the bottom was forged. My hands went cold. But instead of pain, I suddenly felt clear. I saved everything and sent it to the lawyer immediately. He replied, "This is very strong evidence. Keep going, Mrs. Moore. You're doing the right thing." I smiled. Just a small smile, but enough to help me stand firm again after so many months of being treated like nothing. The third ray of hope appeared when I noticed something different in the house. My daughter-in-law was losing patience. She snapped easily, shouted more, threw things around. My son looked exhausted, crushed by financial pressure. He kept getting calls from the bank. I slowly realized their rush to take my house wasn't just because I was inconvenient. It was because they were in debt. Serious debt. I watched quietly. One day, a paper from the bank fell out of my daughter-in-law's bag. I saw the words, "Late payment notice. Third reminder." I didn't say anything. But one thing became very clear to me. Their greed would eventually swallow them whole. All I had to do was wait. I started to sleep again. Not long. Not deeply. But without the suffocating heaviness of the nights before. Before falling asleep, I looked at the ceiling and told myself, I haven't lost. I still have myself. And my husband left me a way to stand up. I closed my eyes. And for the first time in many months, I felt like I was becoming myself again. A kind mother, but not a weak one. A woman who had suffered enough and was now reclaiming her light. Where in the world are you listening from? Comment your city or country so I can see how far the voices of Auntie Tay family has spread. Don't forget to hit subscribe to follow part 5, where the story truly begins to turn. The secret revealed, the moment the truth comes out and their plans begin to crack. For weeks, I stayed quiet, even softer and calmer than usual. Not because I was weak, but because I was waiting for them to feel so confident that they would make a mistake. And that moment came sooner than I expected. That morning, there was a knock at the door. When I walked into the living room, I saw 2 strangers standing at the gate. A man in a dress shirt, holding a briefcase. A young woman holding a stack of documents. There was a logo of a real estate company on their car. Before I could ask anything, they smiled brightly. "Good morning, ma'am. We're here to inspect the property as scheduled with your son." I froze. Inspect the property? Scheduled by my son. It felt like someone had slapped me with a truth I had already sensed but tried not to fully face. Before I could say anything, my daughter-in-law rushed out, her face excited. "Yes, please come in. We need to sell the house as soon as possible." She said it right in front of me clearly, casually, without the slightest shame. I looked around the living room. The curtains had been changed. Some of my things were gone. My husband's old clock had disappeared. They had been preparing for this for a long time. I just hadn't seen it. The agents walked around the house, taking photos of every corner. They asked my son about when the house was built, the size of the land, the reason for selling. My son answered, like he was the true owner. I stood there, watching 2 strangers walk through the space I had lived in for nearly 30 years, watching them open cabinets, measure walls, acting as if this was their property. No one asked me anything. No one acknowledged me. I was invisible in my own home. When the agent asked for the original house title, I knew the moment I'd been waiting for had come. He turned to my son. "Can you show me the original title deed? We'll need it for appraisal." My son looked at my daughter-in-law. They both froze. They didn't have it. Because I had never given it to them. And they had no idea that the original document was inside the small handbag I kept hidden in my room. I stepped forward and said calmly, "The house title is here. But there are a few things we need to clarify before you proceed." The agents stopped. My son and daughter-in-law went stiff. I placed a stack of documents on the table. Not rushed. Not shaking, not angry, just steady. I looked straight at them and said, "This house does not belong to you. My daughter-in-law shot up from her chair. "What are you talking about? This is family property." I shook my head and opened the title deed so everyone could see the owner line. My name, no one else's. My son's face went pale. The agents exchanged confused glances. But that was only the beginning. I took out another document, a copy of the agreement I had made them sign, the one they thought was a simple consent form for renovations. My son stared at the papers, still not understanding. I spoke slowly, so they would hear every word. "What you signed was a statement that neither of you has any ownership rights over this house. All decisions belong to me." My daughter-in-law shouted, "That's impossible! You tricked us!" I looked at her, not angry, just deeply sad. I didn't trick anyone. I protected myself. You planned to throw me out of my own house, so I had to prepare. My son slammed his hand on the table. "You can't do this. I'm your son." I held his gaze. "When you called me a burden, when you locked the fridge, when you moved me into that dark little room, did you look at me as your mother then?" He fell silent. No words came out. At that moment, the agent stood up awkwardly. I think we should leave. This seems to be a family matter." I nodded. "Thank you for coming. But this house will not be sold." They left quickly, leaving the three of us in a suffocating silence. Then I finally said the words I had never dared to say before. "From today on, neither of you is allowed to contact any agents or banks without me. Everything is mine, and I will not sign anything else." My daughter-in-law burst into tears, shouting, "You're so selfish. Do you want us to end up on the street?" I replied calmly, "I have never put you on the street. But you were planning to do exactly that to me." No one said another word. The papers lay still on the table. But inside that house, everything had changed. No more fear, no more forced silence, only the truth. And the truth was something they never imagined I would hold in my hands. That night, I sat alone on the porch. The wind was gentle, the air cold. I wrapped a scarf around my neck and stared at the faint streetlights in the distance. For the first time in months, I took a deep breath and didn't feel like choking. I felt as if I had just stepped through an invisible doorway, the door between weakness and self-protection. I understood one thing very clearly. They are not the ones who decide my life. I am. And this game had only just begun. Where in the world are you listening from? Comment your city or country so the Voices of Auntie Tay family knows you're here with us. Don't forget to hit subscribe to keep listening to part 6, where the climax of this story begins to rise to its strongest point. After the real estate agents left, the house fell into a terrifying silence. No one spoke to anyone. No clinking dishes, no footsteps, no arguing voices from the young couple's room. Only the ticking of the clock, tick, tick, tick. As if it was counting down to the moment everyone would have to face the consequences. I sat down on the sofa, the same sofa where I once fell asleep while taking care of my son when he had a fever at 6 years old. Today, I sat there. But I was no longer the weak mother I had been in the past months. I sat like the true owner of the house, ready to end the game they thought I was too naive to understand. My son was the first to speak. "Mom, you can't do this to us. We're struggling. We just want to keep the house so we can be stable." I looked at him. His face no longer held the confidence it once had. There was fear. There was confusion. And there was guilt. I spoke softly, but very clearly. "You want to keep the house? Then why did you plan to throw me out of it?" He lowered his head, saying nothing. I continued, "You called me a burden. You locked the fridge so I couldn't eat with you. You moved me to the darkest room in the house. You let your wife throw your father's things into the garage. And now, you say you just want stability?" I gave a sad little smile. "You're trying to build your stability on your own mother's misery." My daughter-in-law burst into tears. "Mom, I know we were wrong, but you have to understand us. We're in debt. We don't have any other choice." I turned to her. "How much do you owe?" She flinched. She hadn't expected me to ask so directly. Then she stammered, almost $80,000. I paused for a moment. 80,000, not a small amount. But what hurt me wasn't the number. It was how they treated me because of that number. I sighed. "You two are in debt. But the one who had to pay the price was me? My son clenched his fists, trying to stay calm. I know you're upset. But you're old now. You don't understand our pressure, I frowned. Don't understand pressure? I slowly stood up. I looked straight at him with the eyes of a mother who had given her youth to raise her child. Do you know, your father and I were once so poor we had to split one meal in half? Do you know, I once worked 2 jobs at the same time so you could go to college? Do you know, I slept in the car for 3 nights when your father was sick, just to save money on a hotel? I put my hand on my chest. I know what pressure is, son. But I never used my pressure as an excuse to hurt my family. My son broke down crying. For the first time since all of this began, he sobbed. I was wrong, Mom, but I couldn't hug him right away. I couldn't pretend nothing had happened, because this pain was not something a simple apology could heal. I finally said what I had been holding inside for months. You didn't treat me like family. You treated me like an obstacle, a burden, an old person with no value. I paused, then continued. But from today on, you will see that this old mother is not as weak as you think. Then I made my decision. In 30 days, both of you must move out of this house. My daughter-in-law screamed as if I had just said the cruelest thing in the world. You really want to kick us out. You don't love us anymore. I answered gently. This is my house, and I want peace, not chaos. My son ran to me and fell to his knees. Please, Mom. Not for me. For our child. He needs a home. I looked down at him. Do you think I don't? Silence. The whole house went quiet. Suddenly, there was another knock at the door the second that day. My lawyer walked in. I had called him earlier while the agents were still there. He placed a stack of papers on the table. Mrs. Moore, I brought the official notice. Legally, you can require them to leave within 30 days. If they refuse, we can proceed through legal channels. My daughter-in-law turned pale. My son stood up, staggering, as if all his strength had left him. The lawyer looked directly at them. I've reviewed all the evidence, Mrs. Moore provided. Forged signatures, unauthorized changes to property information, elder abuse, financial coercion. All of these can be subject to criminal charges. No one breathed. My son finally choked out. Mom, you would really do this to me? I walked over, rested my hand on his shoulder. No shaking, no anger. It's not me doing this to you. You pushed me here yourselves. In that moment, every layer of pretense fell away. No more blame. No more excuses. Just the cold truth and 2 people forced to face what they had done. I looked at them one last time and said, I'm not asking you to leave because I hate you. I'm asking you to leave because I have to love myself first. Where are you listening to this part from? Comment your city or country so I know you're walking with me through the tensest minutes of this story. Don't forget to subscribe to Voices of Auntie Tay to hear Part 7, the final 35-0, 45-0, where everything is resolved and peace returns. After the lawyer came to the house, everything changed. No more arguments in the kitchen. No more heavy footsteps stomping into the living room. No more whispers behind my back. The house became quiet, but it wasn't the silence before a storm. It was the silence of 2 people finally facing real consequences. I had never expected this to happen, but it came as a natural result of everything that had been done. The first day after the 30-day decision, my daughter-in-law hardly slept. She paced back and forth, her face swollen from crying. My son avoided my eyes, speaking to me only in short, shaky sentences. I knew this wasn't a victory. It was an awakening, and awakenings are always painful. That morning, I heard my daughter-in-law whisper to him, "What are we going to do now? Rent, debt, bills. I really don't know what to do." My son's voice broke. "This is my fault. I pushed Mom to the point where she had to do this." I stood outside the door, hearing every word, every breath. My son, the little boy who once ran into the kitchen to hug my legs, was now standing at the edge of a cliff, not because of me, but because of what he had done. I went into the kitchen and quietly prepared a pot of tea. When I placed a cup in front of him, he looked up at me with red eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry." Just those 3 words. But they softened my heart like dry earth after rain. I sat across from him, not scolding, not snapping, only asking, "Why did you choose that path, instead of telling me the truth?" He was silent for a long time. So long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said quietly, shoulders trembling, "Because I was ashamed. My business failed. I didn't want you to think I was a failure. I thought, if we could get the house, we could use it as collateral, get a loan, and start again." I looked at the son I had loved, with everything in me. I saw a grown man, but deep inside, still the same little boy who was afraid of his teacher's scolding, afraid of being laughed at, afraid I would be disappointed in him. I sighed softly. "You're not a failure because you lost money. You only fail when you forget that you still have a mother." He bowed his head, tears falling onto the table. "And my daughter-in-law?" That evening, while I was watering the plants in the front yard, she came over. Her face was pale, her hands twisting together nervously. "Mom." Her voice was small, like a kitten. I didn't look at her at first, I just kept watering the flowers. I know, I did things that were wrong. I was hot-tempered, greedy, selfish, but I was truly terrified. Because I'm about to become a mother, I don't want my child to grow up in debt. I stopped, turned and looked at her for a long time. Maybe this was the first time she had spoken honestly, no defensiveness, no blaming, no arrogance. I asked, "Then why didn't you tell me from the beginning?" She pressed her lips together. "Because I was afraid you'd think I married him for money. And I was jealous of the love you gave him. Because I never had a mother." Suddenly, my heart tightened. A new wound appeared, not mine, but hers. I put the watering can down, walked closer and said, "You can be wrong, but you were never my enemy. Our real enemies are silence and fear." She broke down crying, as if letting out years of bottled-up pain. I didn't change my decision, but I chose a softer way. They still had to leave after 30 days. That was necessary for me to reclaim my peace. But I said, "I'm not calling the police. I'm not dragging you into legal trouble. I just want you to start over in the right way." My son looked at me, eyes red. "Mom, you really forgive us?" I smiled. "Forgiveness isn't to make you comfortable. Forgiveness is so I can be at peace." 30 days later, on the day they moved out, I stood at the door to see them off. Not happy, not sad, just calm, like closing a chapter full of pain, but also full of lessons. My daughter-in-law came to hug me, sobbing, "Thank you for not abandoning us the way we almost abandoned you." I patted her back and said, "Don't ever do this to anyone else in your life." My son hugged me tightly, for the first time in many years. "Mom, I promise, I'll become someone you can be proud of." I answered, "You don't have to be impressive. Just be a decent person. That's enough." And then, peace returned. I fixed up the little garden by the porch. I placed my husband's old wooden table and chairs under the maple tree. Every morning, I opened the windows to let the wind in, to let sunlight warm the rooms that had once felt so heavy. I bought back an old piano from a secondhand store and put it in the living room, right where my husband's photo now sat in a new frame. I signed up for a senior yoga class. Sometimes I baked cinnamon bread, my husband's favorite, and brought some to the neighbors. I lived. Not to wait for anyone, not to please anyone, but to be happy for myself. And my son? He found a new job. The salary wasn't high, but it was stable. He texted me every night, "I love you, Mom. Have you eaten yet? Don't forget to dress warm." Messages I hadn't seen from him in years. Things didn't become perfect. The scars didn't disappear. But something had changed. A kind of maturity. An awakening. A coming home. And I understood. The quietest form of revenge is not to make them suffer. Not to expose them. Not to prove you won. It is to take your life back and let them realize on their own. Being cruel to the person who sacrificed everything for you is the fastest way to destroy your own life. I didn't defeat them. I defeated the fear inside myself. And that was enough. Where in the world are you listening from? Comment your city or country so I know the voices of Auntie Tay family is everywhere. Don't forget to subscribe to hear more emotional, deeply moving family drama stories like this one.